Hello, my name is Ben.
And my name's Josh.
And welcome back to FPL Graduates and welcome back to another video on Fantasy Premier League. The game is now out and we can start building drafts. So myself and Josh have got straight into it and started building our teams. And let's show you where we've got so far.
Okay, so we'll crack on into my draft first. Finished 1,519th last season. So my best ever finish. Really good season. Whether I can improve on that this season is going to be a very tough ask, but we'll try our best. So in this first draft, I'm going to talk through all the players that we've got in, some players, why we've got them in, and maybe why we're avoiding maybe a couple of other players that could be similar options as well. So in goal, I've got Aaron Ramsdale. Obviously, Arsenal last season, unbelievable. I think Ramsdale at 5 million is a bargain of a price. Arsenal are only going to get better this season with the signings of Rice, Havertz, Jurrien Timber as well. They're all going to massively improve the depth of that squad as well. Now they have Champions League. So yeah, I think clean sheets are definitely on the cards. Their fixtures as well to start the season, Arsenal, are very good and very clean sheetable, if you could say. So he is in net. What's your thoughts on Arsenal and maybe Ramsdale in particular, Ben?
Yeah, I like Ramsdale in that defence. Obviously, Timber's coming in and we don't quite know yet if anyone's going to be replaced, like how he's going to sort of play in that back four. So to go with Ramsdale is a lot safer, in my opinion. I think Ramsdale and Zinchenko seem like the safer two picks of what you could go for, because you know the likes of Saliba, Gabriel and Ben White sort of play in the position Timber does as well. So we'll have to wait and see on that. But yeah, he brings in save points. You can't complain too much at 5 million. It allows you to spend a maximum of 9 million in total to guarantee yourself Ramsdale and a 4 million keeper. So really no complaints at all with this one.
Okay, so moving on into the defence now. We're going with a three at the back at the moment. Nathan Ake to kick things off. Manchester City's fixtures to start the season are unbelievable. And one thing that we can guarantee with Pep is that his squad size is quite small. I think that Pep roulette is not necessarily as bad as it was a few seasons ago, especially in defence as well. He tries to keep it fairly consistent. Nathan Ake as well, playing that left centre-back, left-back kind of role. There's no one else there at the minute at City that can almost replace him. Aymeric Laporte is rumoured to be leaving this summer as well. So I think for £5 million, you can't really go wrong. The City defenders are priced quite nicely that if they do get rotated, it's not the end of the world, because you're not spending the likes of like 6 million of seasons gone by on like Ruben Diaz and stuff like that. So he's there for the first defender. Next up is Estupiñán. Again, £5 million. I think it's a fantastic price. He was unbelievable towards the back end of last season. You know, goals, assists, clean sheets, Luton at home at the first game of the season. You can't ask for much more than that. Really, really nice asset. I think Ben might have him too in his draft. And then Luke Shaw as well to finish things up. 5.5 million. A little bit on the spenny side. I've seen a few people look towards Wan-Bissaka and Diogo Dalot as cheaper alternatives. For me personally, I think Dalot doesn't start the season. I think Wan-Bissaka will. So 4.5 million there is not a bad price shaving, but you don't get the attacking output that Luke Shaw gives you. You know, really reliable, always going to start for United when he's fit. So he's there as my third defender. What's your thoughts on that defence, Ben?
Yeah, pretty solid. And to begin with, pretty template in the main. Obviously, Ake is somewhat of a differential right now. I don't know what his ownership is, but I imagine it's quite low at the moment. But yeah, with Luke Shaw and Estupiñán in there, two well-renowned assets from last season, very consistent with their returns last season. And I think, you know, those two are going to be fairly high owned. Estupiñán at 5 million is a bargain as well. Brighton have got some good fixtures to start the season. And I'd say Ake is probably good value as well if he gets the starts. And yeah, we don't know how City are going to line up, if they're going to make transfers, etc. But for now, he does seem to be the first choice in that left centre-back role.
Okay, so moving on into the midfield, and probably your most important part of your FPL team this season. There are so many options to just choose from, so many different price ranges to choose from as well. So this is what I've gone with. Mo Salah in the main, 12.5 million this season. Gone with the two premium options, and I think he will stay there. You can downgrade him and get, you know, a plethora of 8.5 to, you know, 6.5 million midfielders. But I think Mo Salah, alternating on captaincy with another man in my team, I'm sure you could probably guess him, will be the way I'll look to go forwards. Phil Foden as well. Again, a bit of a rotation risk. A lot of people seem to think. Just remember that Kevin De Bruyne is obviously going to miss the start of the season with that hamstring injury that he's got in the Champions League final. There's no Gundogan either, obviously. So I think Foden in that 10 role potentially could be a lock-in. And for 7.5 million, I'm willing to take the risk because not United, City, look really dangerous, especially with him playing there. And yeah, I'm really excited with those fixtures going forward. And Ciso, 5.5 million, little differential. He was 4.5 million forward last season. Towards the end of the season, got a lot of minutes. He'll be one that I'll pay attention closely to in pre-season because we're not sure how that Brighton team's going to line up going into this season. There's a lot of transfers going on there, a lot of options up top. Obviously, they've got Europa League this year as well. So we'll see. But I think, 5.5 million, even if he doesn't necessarily play full 90 minutes, he could be an explosive little asset at that price. And Bumo is up next. A forward playing in midfield, out of position. You can't complain. Tottenham at home on the first day. I could easily see Brentford causing them a few problems. And he'll be at the front of that. Obviously, no Ivan Toney, but that just means that, Mbumo could be on penalties. It's going to be a really, really good option. Looking forward to see if Ben has him. And then Bruno Fernandes to finish off the midfield. 8.5 million cut price this year on penalties, on set pieces. Wolves at home on the first day. For me, personally, I think he is a better asset than Marcus Rashford this season. I just think there's going to be so much, almost everything goes through Bruno Fernandes one way or another. It's just whether if he can up his goals this season, like we've seen in seasons gone by with the penalties and stuff like that, is where he'll really get his points. What's your thoughts, Ben?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm going to say there's some pretty template picks because I've got some of these players in my team as well. I think Bruno provides good value, and sort of thinking over the last couple of days as well, even Rashford at 9 million is still good value for me. Yeah. And if you have that 0.5, you could easily be tempted to move it up there. And Mbeumo, I think, is going to be in the majority of sort of engaged managers' teams, just because he's a midfielder playing up top, and not just up top, the main focal point up top. And Ciso, I really like. He had his sort of almost breakout year last year, bursting into the team. It's just a case of basically him or João Pedro to be starting at this point. I anticipate he'll play across the front three, just behind the striker, but where he's going to play, we'll have to hope and see that he is starting matches, and preseason will be a good indication of that. Foden, I really like. He's someone who I've not got in my team, but a lot of factors pointing towards him being good value. 7.5 as well, so he's just below that bracket of the likes of Fernandes, Bukayo, Saka, Martinelli, etc. So I think he can have good value. And we've not seen too many teams actually so far with Salah in. Obviously, that's at the expense for you, Trent Alexander-Arnold. So it is a toss-up of a coin. And effectively, you've gone in the Trent versus Salah. You've gone for Salah there, which is very interesting. Obviously, neither of them are going to get rested for Liverpool. They're pretty, in the main, going to start. So it'd be interesting to see which one scores more points in the opening weeks of the season, because there's a couple of good ones in there for Liverpool in the opening few weeks.
Okay, so moving on then up to the forward line. Two big hitters. Haaland, the captain, he'll be captain most weeks probably, just like last year. 14 million is still a no-brainer. We've spoken about it in previous videos as well. He'll be there. He will not be moved. I will not be downgrading him. It's just a matter of life. And then Gabriel Jesus partners him up top too. Forest at home on the first day. Jesus with the highest expected goal involvement out of all the Arsenal attackers last season. Obviously had that injury midway through the season, sort of hampered him a little bit. But I think for 8 million, it's a good price between him and Martinelli. You could argue both ways, but I personally think the value in midfield at 5.5 million is much better than the value up top at 5.5 million. You've got the likes of maybe like Morris and Ndiaye from the promoted sides, or you've got the likes of maybe like an Enciso who could be, really explosive given if he does start and stuff like that. So I'll be interested to hear what your thoughts are, Ben, on Jesus and maybe the Arsenal attackers in general.
Yeah, I mean, I think going sort of heavy on Arsenal early doors is a good idea, because they've improved massively. In my opinion, they've improved the most out of any of the top four teams. They look in a whole lot stronger, and Jesus's underlying stats are actually the best out of any of the Arsenal attackers anyway. So I do think that's a good move. It's the minutes risk slightly because we know he is a little bit injury prone. We've seen it over the past few seasons. And it's a case of sort of, I think the reward is right up there. And because there are so many good midfielders, in the game, it almost pushes you to make that decision to go towards Gabriel Jesus. So yeah, I really do like that pick, and it's one that I'm 100% considering for my team as well.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting because obviously Kai Havertz is coming in, could be playing a midfield role, but we know he can play up top too, so that could limit Jesus' minutes. But we saw in, I think it was game week 2 last season. I can't remember who they played now, but Jesus had an absolute monster haul, and he has that potential on his day, especially at the Emirates. So it'll be interesting to see if he starts all the time still with the new signings that they bring in, and whether or not there is that rotation that we did just mention. Okay, so wrap things off then. We've got the bench. So Areola is my bench keeper, 4 million, and there's a good chance that he could be starting for West Ham. FPL fella, a friend of the show, a fellow Juice pundit, big West Ham fan, does think that he could potentially overtake Fabianski as the number 1 this season. Regardless, Areola is still probably the best 4 million goalkeeper, in my opinion, at that price. So far we've seen. So Bournemouth away on the opening day, you can't complain if he's starting there. Matty Cash, someone who's gone under the radar, I think, for a lot of FPL managers. Ashley Young has obviously left Aston Villa now, so there's no actual right back other than Matty Cash at Aston Villa. Okay, they might sign someone in that time, but for now, he's their first choice. And I think Aston Villa are a very, very defensively solid team under Unai Emery that we saw towards the back end of last season. So, and there's the attacking threat too, as well, with Cash going forward. I've got Bayer from Burnley, £4 million defender. Probably the most attacking out of the £4 million defenders. Had a lot of look into this. Obviously, you've got Bell from Luton, as well as George Baldock as well from Sheffield United. Bayer plays that sort of wing-back sort of role, gets forward quite a bit for Burnley, and he's just signed for them permanently from Mönchengladbach. So it should be interesting to see how he gets on. And then it's Cameron Archer to finish off as a 4.5 million forward. Balogun is a very interesting one to watch out here at 4.5 million. Could be leaving Arsenal, might be to a Premier League team. If it is, he's got to be a shoo-in in pretty much every single person's Premier League draft. What do you think of the bench, Ben?
Yeah, good. Can't really complain about too many of those. Obviously, Areola's got that potential to start. And I think, Fabianski's got 1 year left. He's 38 years old. He's just had the contract extended. He's picked up quite a few injuries for a keeper over the last year. I was looking into Areola's stats. He's had more bench appearances than any other keeper in the Premier League last year. So I do anticipate him potentially taking a step back and playing more cup games less frequently, which could mean Areola obviously goes into the starting 11 in the Premier League. Matty Cash, I do like him as a pick and as an asset. Obviously, there's no real backup. You could argue maybe Ezri Konsa can play there, but there's no one else there. And he is attacking in himself. Like you've not just put him in because he's got no cover there. He is a good FPL asset as well. Obviously, Bayer, we don't know too much about him in terms of fantasy football and FPL, but I do anticipate he could do quite well. The fixture dependent. I think against the lesser teams, he'll get a lot more freedom to go forward in the way that the Burnley set up. And like you said, Archer could very easily become Balogun. I agree with you there. If he goes to any other Premier League club, he's going to be in excess of 60-70% owned because he's the standout 4.5 if he makes the move from Arsenal. Okay, so moving on into my team, we're going to start off in goal, and it's a very similar story. I've gone with Aaron Ramsdale as well. I think as you go through the team, there will be similarities. There are a few differences as well, and a few differences in sort of the way that I've thought and my process has gone into building this first draft. And this is literally my first draft. I haven't tinkered at all with it. So we'll see what Josh thinks of it as well. Obviously, Ramsdale in goal, we don't need to talk too much on him. Obviously, we both think he's a great asset and worthy of coming into the team. It's interesting, though, we've both gone for a £5 million keeper and a £4 million keeper. I think to start the season, there's nothing wrong with going for a keeper that you can trust to get points. I think a lot of the time last season, I think both myself and Josh fell into a little trap of sort of going around looking for the 4.5 million keepers in teams that weren't necessarily the best. This season, obviously, we've got a lot more options in terms of keepers that have been priced a lot nicer. So we may not have that much of a problem with it, but it's worth just noting that sometimes the 4.5 million keepers are 4.5 million for a reason. Josh, what are your thoughts on that in general? You don't have to speak
Yeah.
too much on Ramsdale because we've already talked about it. But in terms of that strategy.
Yeah, obviously it has its risk and rewards. I see a lot of people go with that Pickford Leno double up as the 4.5s, which they rotate really nicely throughout the first 10 game weeks or so. You could always go for that if you want to play the fixtures sort of thing. But I feel like in my experience doing that, you always tend to start benching points, and then the one you start doesn't get the returns because more often than not, when a lower side face a top 4 side, they're going to get a lot of save points. They might not necessarily get absolutely battered. They might only lose 1-0, and then you got like 6 or something points on your bench. So yeah, for me, I always stick with that 5 million, 4 million, and then hopefully the 4 million is a playing 4 million. So then if Ramsdale was to be substituted or something for that reason, then you can just have him come in and not have to make a transfer.
Okay, so moving on into the defense, and there is one key difference in here. I've obviously gone Luke Shaw as well. I think he's providing good value at 5.5, even though there are a lot of other £5 million defenders that could provide good options. Also gone Estupiñán. We know about him. He was so good last year. I think he can continue that with Brighton this year with their nice opening fixtures. And then I've gone Trent Alexander-Arnold in defence. Now, we saw Liverpool test the new system, almost with Trent playing a more advanced midfield role last season. And I do think this is going to lend very, very nicely to Trent Alexander-Arnold this season with the way that Liverpool are playing, the players that they brought into the system really suggest that they're going to play a very direct game, quick to move from one area of the pitch to the other, quick transitions. And Trent Alexander-Arnold could really benefit off that. Josh, what are your thoughts on, first of all, not owning the player who's created the most chances in the league from defence, but also Trent Alexander-Arnold as an asset in general?
Yeah, it's one of those ones where you just can't own them all, unfortunately. He's an expensive price this season, 8 million. That 0.5 does make a difference, I think. He's a fantastic option, and if you can fit him in, by all means, definitely fitting him in. But for one thing that sort of turned me off him a little bit is just seeing how this midfield of Liverpool works itself out, seeing who plays where and stuff like that. I think it's just going to be interesting there because I think they've got a lot of good passes in that midfield now as well. So the reliance amongst Trent to be that direct passer is maybe not as much of a burden as it was towards the back end of last season, where he was the only one who could play those direct passes. Yeah, due to the new signings of Szoboszlai and McAllister, I just don't think the reliance among the passing and directness that we've seen from Trent towards the back end of last season is as important. Don't get me wrong, I do still think Trent's going to create a shed load of chances and still be a really important player for Liverpool, but it is one of those cases of just not being able to own everyone.
Okay, so we're moving into my midfield now, and there's a couple of familiar faces from this video and also a couple of new ones we haven't talked about yet. So obviously we've got Enciso in there. I do think at 5.5 he's probably the best value midfielder out there right now. And obviously we're gonna look at the preseason games, and Brighton is going to be a team that I'm going to be looking at quite a lot because their squad's relatively big and a lot of jostling for rotation. Bruno Fernandes, obviously in there. I picked him over Rashford on the penalties side of things, but I could easily upgrade that to Rashford. I don't see any issues with owning him. I've got Mbeumo in there, obviously a midfielder position, and he's playing up top. Really can't complain too much about that. Now, I've gone with a double up on the Arsenal midfielders. I've gone Martinelli, who is 8 million, and Saka, who's 8.5 million. The reason I've gone for both of them and a double up in the Arsenal sort of going forwards is I think they're going to score a lot of goals. And I think they're also, the fixtures are pretty decent to start with. A couple of really nice ones in there. And like I said, Arsenal have improved the most out of any of the top 4 teams. And I truly do think that's going to show come the start of the season. Josh, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think, doubling up, even tripling up on that Arsenal attack is definitely a move that you could definitely justify because their fixtures are really good, similar to City as well. Like they both just have tremendous fixtures to start the season. Obviously, Martinelli and Saka so good last season. Saka on the penalties. You got 3 penalty taken midfielders there, which is, exactly what you want. Martinelli, I think at 8 million is unbelievable value. I'm not sure why they priced him lower than Odegaard and Saka. I think, he's definitely worth the 8.5 million if he was there as well. So yeah, really interesting picks. It's interesting that you've gone Martinelli and Saka instead of Jesus, even though you said Jesus has the best underlying numbers than all of them. But we'll wait and see come game week 1.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, this is the first draft, and I imagine, it could easily become some sort of like a Martinelli to a Foden, and my striker up to a Jesus. Like there's definitely a lot of flexibility in teams this year, and we've seen that with sort of, there is a base core, but there is also, the different picks you can go for, like the Enciso, like a Martinelli, a Bruno, even to some extent. But yeah, we'll go into my 2 strikers. So I've gone with, of course, Erling Haaland, and at the moment, Ollie Watkins up front. I do think sort of the back end of last season, well, in fact, the second half of the season as a whole, Ollie Watkins was just phenomenal. And I do think Aston Villa are improving massively again under Unai Emery. So I only expect good things from them again. I do want Aston Villa coverage in my team this season, and Watkins is there at the moment. It could change sort of dependent on how I feel about Gabriel Jesus. But yeah, that is the front 2. Not too much to be said about Haaland, but Ollie Watkins, Josh, is that a player you've considered at all, or is that sort of a player that you thought, you know what, not for me?
Personally, I haven't considered him just because of the amount of options that you can get for that price at 8 million, especially in midfield. We discussed Martinelli, Jesus, these sorts of players playing for Arsenal with their fixtures, really, really good. Newcastle away is a very tough fixture on the opening day for Villa. But that's not to say that I don't want Villa coverage like yourself. I've got Matty Cash on the bench for a reason. I think Aston Villa are one of the best sides in the Premier League, especially towards the back end of last season. Unai Emery absolutely turned them around. They were in like the relegation zone when he took over. So for them to be fighting for Europe by the end of it was unbelievable. And I think they're only going to improve. It's really disappointing that Jacob Ramsey got injured in the Euros, because I think he could have been an absolute bargain this season. He's one of their best players towards the back end last season too. So for a midfield pick later on in the season, I think he could be really good. But yeah, Aston Villa are the team to watch that are going under the radar right now.
Okay, so finally, moving on to my bench, I've got Areola, the same as Josh, for very similar reasons, that I think he could potentially start in that West Ham team. But regardless, as a £4 million keeper, you can't complain too much. I've gone for Botman as my 4.5 million defender. I think he's, despite some tricky opening sort of 3 or 4 fixtures, after that point, I think he's going to provide really good value. Yeah, you can't complain too much. 4.5 million. I thought it was going to be 5 or even 5.5 million this year. I've gone for Bell of Luton Town. I've gone with him over any of the other £4 million defenders, because Luton's first few fixtures are far better than any of the other £4 million defenders. So I've gone for the fixtures over sort of the form and the stats that Josh was sort of going with the Burnley player. And then I've got Archer as well as my sort of 4.5 million fodder striker, which if Balogun goes, we all know what's going to happen there. So yeah, Josh, that is what the bench is looking like right now.
Yeah, I think Bell is probably the safest pick out of all of the 4 million defenders. He played the most fixtures out of all the 4 million defenders that we've spoken about. So he's pretty nailed down, playing like a left centre back, left wing back kind of role in that Luton system. So, there is a small potential for attacking returns, but just remember that all of these teams are newly promoted. They're not going to get crazy amounts of attacking opportunities. That £4 million defender, you just want to really get appearance points and leave. There's not, although we'd love to find the next John Lundstrom in FPL, I just don't think something like that's ever going to happen again, unfortunately. So, yeah, really good option there. And like you said, Botman as well. Unbelievable value at 4.5. I think a lot of people will not pick him just because it's an easy pick, if that makes sense, if they're just trying to overthink it a little bit. But I think he could be really good value, and Newcastle defence is one of the best in the league.
Okay, so that rounds up our first drafts of the season. What do you think of them? Let us know. Is there players that we've missed out on? I mean, it's going to be tinkered with a lot over the coming weeks, as I'm sure yours are too. And yeah, I'll leave it to Josh.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see how much these teams change by game week 1. Obviously, we've got a whole pre-season to go through as well. So make sure you stay subscribed, and we'll be releasing our game week 1 teams right before the deadline.
Yeah, and as always, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. And as usual, I've been Ben.
I've been Josh.
And we'll see you guys
later.